Hello and welcome to the Empowered Couples Podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And today's episode is about improving your apology after an argument and what it means to truly repair.
Yes, this is going to be really key, so you're going to want to listen all the way through because we're going to talk about how to not just have it be the same old, I'm sorry, can we just move on? And Aaron, do you want to share, I think we really got a powerful life lesson this week.
Oh yeah, it's one of those times where life strikes you. And so my uncle, actually my last uncle, I found out passed away. And for many, it's these life situations that seem so out of the blue and so shocking and surprising that it's so hard to accept. And not to go into a long story about it, but essentially he was about 58 and had been retired from his architecture career for a few years. And just in this case, he's always outside, always building things, super joyful, was having these past years with his kids and my aunt, and just honestly out of the blue, he was driving and kind of went unconscious and happened to hit a car in front of him, only at 20 miles an hour, but he kind of came to and people were like, "Oh, are you okay? Like, what happened?" So medics cleared him to drive back home. And he started to say that he wasn't feeling very well, and he asked my aunt to go pick up my little cousin, and she did. And when she came back, he was just gone.
Yeah.
And so I think they said it was a series of like a heart attack, but he was healthy, young, and it just, in a sense, it doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, I think it's obvious for people that are listening that there have been life events like this that end up really snapping you into the present.
Yeah.
And like this, getting, oh my gosh, we actually kind of live our lives as if it's going to go on forever.
Right.
Or because many people live to be in their 80s, 90s, some 100s, that we just assume that ourselves and everyone in our life is going to be that way. Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is, we don't know. The human being is a series of time, of energy, and memory. And the time factor, we actually don't know.
Exactly.
And it's just one of these opportunities, in a sense, to really look and say, wow, we actually don't know if tomorrow is guaranteed for me or for my partner. And that's kind of, what we've been talking about and what's driving the basis of a conversation we want to have today.
And, I know that's kind of a pretty big life lesson to start with, but I think we all need that reminder sometimes that we can keep living like, I'll just deal with this later, but you aren't guaranteed tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And going to the topic today about improving your apology after an argument and what it means to truly repair, I think the bigger perspective is that you're not just repairing just because you want to get back to a good day today. It's because you may not know if you're going to get to repair. And you don't want to live with regret in your relationship. And Aaron and I, to be honest, in our personal relationship, about a week ago, we had a pretty meaty disagreement. And usually we are really good at interrupting our patterns and not having things get escalated, hence why we did an episode recently on de-escalating things. But this is one where there was like some real things being shared that we hadn't opened up about in a little bit. And so we were in a repair process for a couple days afterwards. And then we heard about your uncle, and it's just an important perspective. You don't want to let things linger and stay incomplete in your relationship. Because like I said, you don't want to live with regret. You don't want to say, gosh, what if I had repaired that with my partner? And you can just keep living like later we'll deal with this. Later. You don't know that you have later.
Yeah. And it's not meant to be something that really discourages you that's listening. Mm-hmm. If you really think about it, if you own this idea that I honestly don't know, we're not wishing death on anyone.
No.
But if you own that you don't know necessarily what will be for tomorrow for yourself or for someone that you love, all of a sudden it brings you into the present moment in a way that you're not going to waste these moments. It actually, by being present to death, you actually become more alive in the moment. It's actually when we put aside and don't think about and try to distract ourselves and think, oh, I have forever. It's that idea that actually keeps you into a mundane, routine, very repetitive, boring life where the opposite is so true. If you really own this, then you will do whatever is needed in the moment to have the very best experience.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the main points of takeaway. And of course, I mean, this can be something typical for people when these life events happen, but don't wait for that. Why? Don't wait for something quote unquote bad or surprising to happen, like someone passing away. You can actually take on this mentality right now and start to live that kind of presence. And I'm going to do anything in the moment, in this case, in my relationship, to not be further disconnected or have any resentment, which really brings us to apology is not going to cut it.
Not just I'm sorry. Like, that's not
Saying just that I'm sorry, which we're going to cover here right now, it's the order really in which you do these things. But just to say, hey, I'm sorry, and to think that that actually truly repairs anything, it just doesn't.
Yeah, and we know that a lot of you, because we've had this topic relevant on a lot of our sessions of couples, like, we don't repair, we just let things pass, but really it's lingering and we're kind of disconnected now. That's why, if you're hearing this episode, you want to make sure that you are registered for our web class, because we're going to be doing one on Tuesday, October 5th. And we're going into fighting smarter, how to prevent unnecessary disagreements. Why? So you can have more life, like enjoy your life together as a couple. Then also we're going to talk about during conflict, de-escalating triggers, so you're not doing damage to each other, and then repairing. So do not miss the web class that's happening on Tuesday, October 5th. Make sure you go register at onlinecouplesworkshops.com, because we're going to go so much deeper into this, and the visuals are really helpful in the web class. But continuing on right here, because we want to start to dive in on this repair process. And I want to share that we already talked about how repair is important so you don't have regret, that tomorrow's not guaranteed. But repair is important after any disagreement, whether it is small or big, whether it's going to take a minute to repair or 3 days to repair, because everything has a different amount of time depending on what was said, what was the topic, how much damage was done. So the repair time might be different, but no matter what, even if it's only a minute of repair is needed because it was something kind of silly and smaller, the repair is important, because otherwise you drag emotional baggage into the future. It doesn't just disappear. Like you think, oh, just time passing will do it. No, after you and I had our disagreement last Friday, there was like the lingering things that I was wondering and we still wanted to talk about. There was the emotional residue to work through. And if we didn't continue our repair process that we're going to talk to them about here today, I would have dragged that energy into the future, and it could have come up another time. And I could have referred to it. See, this is just like then. So repair is important. And I think our culture, we live in a very reactionary, kind of like just treat the symptoms. If you have a headache, just take Tylenol. But in a relationship, you can't just keep treating the momentary symptoms of things. You want to get to more of the root cause and make sure you're repairing what's going on for you. So again, you're not dragging that energy into the future, and it does come out at some point. It's not just disappear. It doesn't magically disappear.
Well, that's a first point I wanted to make about apology and what true repair actually is, because actually, if you just wait over a period of time, the emotion and the energy does dissipate.
Like the heat of the emotion.
Heat of the emotion. I don't know, the emotion, the elevated emotion, the feeling of disconnect, the feeling of being disrespected or disregarded or hurt or isolated, whatever that is, it's heightened in those moments. That's kind of what a conflict in a sense is. But just waiting an amount of time for that to dissipate or peter out, that isn't what the goal should be for saying this is resolved.
Yeah, like, oh, we're just kind of numb now, so it must be.
Well, not just numb. It's like, well, that emotion is there. Then you go do some other things. You kind of distract yourself. And then the emotion of, pick one, of feeling like disrespected or hurt, it does become less over some period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't actually repair anything for either yourself or for your partner. And since you're in a relationship, you actually have to be considering both sides of this as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really one of the key things, that what it means to truly repair is not just letting that level of energy and emotion just kind of dissipate, meaning it's then not as present in your body or as top of mind. And I do think that some partners, there was a couple of men that we talked to in our coaching this past week, that's actually how they related to things, quote unquote, being resolved.
Oh, yeah.
Is that they just got to the point, well, I'm not feeling that anymore, so now we're resolved.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But is your partner resolved? I mean, we talked about the 3 questions to ask on the last episode. That's got to be a key focus.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about you. It's not just if this quote unquote feels that the energy is dissipated for you, because it may or may not, in this case, be for your partner. And that's just the first thing.
I want to refer back to an episode we did a couple months ago now about things that lead to feeling emotionally disconnected. And this is one of the biggest ones, you guys. When you don't repair, it creates clutter between you two, emotional clutter. And we talk to so many couples who are like, yeah, I don't know, we're just kind of disconnected. I'm not sure why. This is one of the reasons why, because you've just been stepping over things and not repairing them. And then it creates this clutter, and slowly it builds distance between you two. So I do want to talk about, I was reflecting on improving your apology and the repair process. And also I'm reading a parenting book, The Danish Way of Parenting. And one of the principles is about empathy. And it really made me think about, in our repair process, when you and I are recovering from something, we're resolving something, there's this period that I go through where I'm resisting empathizing with you. It's all about me. And we can be so selfish as humans sometimes. I'm saying we, right? Like me too. I'm not just calling you out, but I am calling you out, the listener. Check it out. Sometimes we can be so focused on ourselves. Am I okay? How do I feel after this? Am I past it? There's this period where we're so fixated on us that we don't think about our partner and what was that disagreement like for them? Or what's the impact on them of things I said or did, or the root cause of this, or how they're feeling. And that's where one thing I'm really checking out in myself right now is just moments when I'm righteous. And when we do sessions with couples, sometimes I can see, I'm like, wow, and it's never judgment, because again, I can see it in my human self. There's moments where it's like, wow, you're being so righteous. Like you're so committed that you are the right one here and your partner is wrong. How is that love? That's not like loving and empathizing with them. So basically going back to, for you to improve your apology and not just have it sound robotic and just like, I'm sorry, Kay. It's like you have to truly empathize with them. Can you put yourself in their shoes and imagine what it was like for them? Not easy. Empathy truly is one of the hardest traits to embody as a human, because it requires you to set aside your perspective for a moment, how you feel about something, and to really own. And sometimes we have to humble ourselves and say, you know what, maybe I contributed to this. So empathy takes being really honest with yourself, humbling yourself, realizing you're not perfect all the time, and putting yourself in your partner's shoes and seeing their perspective, even if you don't agree and see it the same way.
Yeah, one of the things you have to own, that you're not having to take on the entire burden of, say, responsibility and feel shame. That's why this is such a fine line, but you do have to empathize. You have to understand that you took X action and it had Y impact on your partner. Mm-hmm. And the hard part about this is you could literally say, it doesn't make sense to me, number one, that you feel that way. And then what do most people argue? well, that wasn't my intent. It doesn't make sense. Don't you know that
I meant this and not this?
Yeah, so it's a purely logic now. I wouldn't just say conversation, but you're trying to logic your partner out of feeling how they're feeling. And in this case, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you agree with it. It doesn't matter if you would have seen it the same way, if you would have been impacted the same way. You just have to say, I get that what from your sharing with me, when I said this, when I did this, it has you feel now this way. And that's the part that it takes for full, true repair.
Yes.
And you have to put all the logic aside. The order of events, the logic, what was said, what was not said, what you were supposed to mean, how they took it, the perspective, all of that. You just have to let it go. And the only way for true repair is to actually acknowledge, hey, what I'm hearing you say is, when I said this, you felt disrespected and unheard.
And you can feel the difference when someone is apologizing and it's robotic and it's out of like obligation versus when they're apologizing because you can tell they empathize with you. There's an energy difference. And there might be two stages of apology. There might be the first part where you are kind of just being like, hey, I'm sorry, for this and that. And it does feel a little bit more superficial. Then here's where we don't want you to stop. We don't want you to just stop there. If you really feel like there's more kind of still lingering, the emotion's not fully resolved, reflect until you get to the point where you can truly empathize with your partner. And maybe you need to go back to them a second time and say, hey, I know I apologized before. I've still been thinking about it. I really can empathize with your perspective. I imagine feeling the same way if I was in your shoes. They're gonna feel the difference. And yesterday, there was a session where we did with a couple, and they've been doing such good work on their relationship. I mean, they're working through some stuff. And we were helping them work through repair, and we could tell that they were starting to apologize, starting to repair. They hadn't quite gotten to the empathy step. And that's where you just sometimes have to continue to reflect even after the first apology till truly your partner feels like, okay, I think they empathize with me. It feels like that.
Yeah, and that's another part I wanted to add. You have to remember, not to be repetitive here, but that your partner may not be resolved about something that you feel you are. So just because you feel you are doesn't mean that this, for the relationship, for the marriage, is resolved, because you have to include the other person. And I say that because it was really interesting that on 2 calls, the ones that I think you're also referencing, the male in this case, they both kept on saying in their own scenarios, like, well, it wasn't that big of a deal for me. Right? So it's like the conflict of the argument happened, and then they just, each of them separately kind of went away. And they're like, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. But what they both did was they came back sometime a few minutes later, and they like busted into the room where their partner was, and then just like blurted this out. I can't believe you did this. You need to change this. I feel X. And then they just like left. And honestly though, for them, they're like, oh, well, I'm resolved about this situation.
All I needed to do was say that.
Oh, really? Because you just busted in, said all your complaints. And for them, that's like what they needed. Now, that doesn't work. But the point that we took away was, see, that's what needs to get resolved. There's a certain amount of usually understanding that you need to happen for you. What was interesting in how it's said by both of those partners, though, was I just needed my partner to get why I did what I did.
Yeah, like
when you really pause, that's the driver. If you like really check in with your body, what's driving you in those moments, at least a lot of times for men, I think, it's like there's this tension that builds up, like pressure, until I have to get my partner to understand why I did that.
Yeah.
Or I have to get them to understand something. And that's the biggest driver, is this understanding. And that's one of the key pieces to fully having things resolved. Now, in this case, the funny thing about that is, like to your point, you can't just barge in on your partner, release all of your like complaints and what it is you need them to understand, and then leave, and then feel like, or actually to have that be the resolution. Mm-hmm. Because what you did was you came in and now you're causing more of an impact on them.
Yeah, you like offload onto them.
Yes, you created another stream of something that's now unresolved for them. So you have to understand the trickle impact here, because when we were talking about this, he's like, oh, see, I'm resolved on the situation. But like, really, well, you created more unresolved by the way in which you tried to express yourself.
Exactly. So in this repair process, I want to go into a little bit more of what it means to truly repair. And then on the web class, we're going to go into some more steps, and we're going to have some visuals about prompts on what to say to repair. But what it means to truly repair is, number one, that there's emotional acknowledgement on both sides. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, to your point, Aaron, a couple of minutes ago, sometimes one of you is more impacted than the other.
Right.
It doesn't mean if you feel less impacted, because, men sometimes are like, oh, I can just get past it. It's not that big of a deal to me. But to the other partner, it might be bigger. So there has to be emotional acknowledgement on both sides, to where, and sometimes a helpful question to ask is there anything else you need me to acknowledge? Is there anything else you need me to acknowledge, right? That's a really key question, because you might assume like, well, I'm good. No, you need to check that they are. And actually, we received a message from someone who attended our couples workshop, and it was a great question, because it was about, if my partner doesn't keep their agreement, because we talk about agreements in our workshop, what am I supposed to do when they don't agree or see it that way? Mm-hmm. Well, you may feel differently about it, but if you truly care about repairing things with your partner, you will see what else you need to acknowledge for them to be repaired about it. And it might be different than what you need to hear. Again, that's where you have to set aside your own righteousness sometimes, and it being about me. No, what do they need to hear? So emotional acknowledgement on both sides. And then another piece of knowing what it means to truly repair is that there's no lingering questions. So again, for our disagreement last week, the days after, it was a little bit of working through some of my questions, like, hey, did you really mean what you said when you said that? Like that really impacted me, and it made me feel a little bit insecure. And so it was me processing through that. Like, did you really mean that? And then you would say, no, I didn't really mean it that way. This is what I really meant. And then it's like, okay, I needed to hear that again. So you don't want to have lingering questions that leave your partner feeling insecure or unsure, or like they are like, well, did you really mean that? So you want to make sure you're repairing any of those questions.
Yeah, you don't want to leave, I think, doubt.
Exactly.
Because when there's even a little bit of doubt, we all know that if that goes unexpressed and unresolved, the doubt just builds its own momentum. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, one of the key things on bringing full resolution or repair to things, so that you don't have this sense of doubt start to create, like some people say like a crack in the connection or the trust in the relationship. Mm-hmm. Now, to your point, the kind of last thing I wanted to say, it's a small nuance, but assertiveness, which again, we're going to talk more about in the web class, but there's not going to be times where your partner is going to, as you mentioned, see the impact of something the same way. They may actually be resolved within themselves about something, so they're going about their day. Now, you cannot let yourself have unresolved emotion go and build up into resentment, like, oh, I see my partner over there, they're just having fun, they're having a great day, and then you start to get mad, because how can you just be living that way? How can you just move on? It's not fair. So you have to raise your own level of assertiveness in a way of bringing forth to your partner, so that they actually know that you're not resolved about something. They actually might be.
That's true.
So you can't hold that against them, because then what happens if you start to hold that in? All of a sudden, a day later or whatever it is, you blow up at them. Mm-hmm. And I'm like taken off guard. Like, what are you talking about?
I thought we were good.
We already resolved that. Why are you bringing that back up? Yeah. Well, no, your partner, you weren't. But it is up to you to be more assertive, and not in a complaining, triggered manner, but you need to say, hey, that conversation we had, you're probably past it. It might not have been a big deal to you, but there's still some things that I'm not resolved about. So you have to bring that awareness to your partner. Otherwise, it's like this blind side. They're taken off guard. They're surprised, and then they get defensive. And now you're creating like more residual on top of it, all because what? You weren't willing to bring that up proactively.
And it's such a good point you bring that up, because I did that, right? A couple days later, I could tell you were pretty much like you're able to process, repair, and then you can move on. For me, there was still a little bit of stuff lingering, and you're right, I had to bring it up. You weren't going to just keep asking me like, hey, we good from, the other day. I actually had to be like, hey, I think I need to talk a little bit more about, that heated conversation. So great point. And then I think the other place, and even just thinking about our disagreement, we could have stopped there, right? We could have stopped at emotional acknowledgement, which we did. That's critical, you guys. That is number one in this process. We could have worked through all the lingering questions, made sure that neither one of us had doubts, or did you really mean that? Or, just really processing through all the things that were said. You can easily stop there and then just kind of be like, okay, I'm sorry. All right, let's move on with the day.
Well, notice that's the better place for the quote unquote apology, by the way.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Once there's been emotional acknowledgement, then it's like, okay, I truly can empathize with your perspective. I really am sorry. Now, here's where you want to keep going a little bit. And this isn't stepping over the emotion, because like we said, emotion's got to be acknowledged, all the impact. Then it's creating some kind of a plan for the future. Especially if there was something that you saw as the root cause for it. It's okay, what do we need to do in the future here together so that we can prevent this from coming up? And so that's where you and I kind of ended it once there was all the emotion process. And it might be a different conversation, by the way. It might be an emotional conversation first, then you circle back to it later that day or the next day to say, okay, hey, I want to make sure we have a plan for the future so we can prevent that. So don't always think it has to be in the same conversation, because the emotion is the first important part. Then when you're ready, the conversation becomes about, what do we need to either put in place? Is there an agreement we need to set? Is there something we realize that we've been doing that we need to either stop doing, or we need to start doing something? It's like having an action plan, and sometimes it might be a simple thing, and sometimes it might be bigger, right? It might be, we actually need to get some support around this. Or, we need to make sure we get some help, or we hire someone, or, just anything. Like, what's your plan for the future so that you can prevent it from happening again, or that nothing changes? That's one of people's biggest fears or concerns, is that we have this disagreement, we work through all the emotion, and then really nothing's going to change.
That's the main thing for a number of scenarios, especially if something has been unresolved for a little bit of time, or it seems like it might not be the same exact event, but the underlying root cause seems to be the same thing. Like you're saying, that usually comes down to, well, I've even heard this before, they've empathized, but because we're still talking about this from another event, I am not resolved because I don't trust that anything is actually going to change. So in this action plan, and I don't know if it's necessarily for men, but it has been coming up, I think, more so. If you just are saying kind of a compliance type of, yes, we're going to do that, maybe you are actually authentic and you actually have the intent to do that in the moment. So you have to put something in place for your own accountability to actually make that change.
Yes.
If you're going to say, yes, we're going to do that, again, you might mean that in the moment, but if you're someone that doesn't have as much structure, or even if you're forgetful, you have to own that this is just as much your commitment as theirs if they brought this up. And so it's just as much your role to make sure that the change actually happens.
Yes.
You can't now rely on your partner. This is going to be a big problem. You can resolve it emotionally. You can come with the action plan. You say, we're going to do that. If it lives for you as if this is the responsibility of your partner to make this change, it's not going to work long term. And they're not going to have the trust in you And then the same thing's going to happen. Oh, well, okay, you empathize with me, you acknowledge the emotion. But if there's a tendency and a pattern for you not to take ownership and actually sometimes lead that this change actually happens, they're not going to be resolved because they don't trust anything's going to change.
And literally, I'm fired up by what you're saying because, so we did an episode again recently on integrity. I'm referring to some episodes because some of you may need these reminders to go back and listen to them. The greatest next step you can take to improve your apology, we talked about empathy, and you have to truly get to a place of empathy. The other piece to what you're saying is put action behind it. Put action behind your apology. So if you come up with this action plan and you say, yes, I'm going to work on this, or I'm going to do this, or I agree to this, I promise this, put action immediately. Part of repairing something is that you too feel like there's a change ASAP. So don't just kind of say something like you said out of compliance. Put some real action behind it. Show your partner right away that there's going to be a shift. So let's say you're trying to repair and the argument was about not getting quality time and not feeling prioritized, not feeling important. Well, don't just say, okay, yeah, honey, we'll go on more dates, or I'll stop working as late in the night, or I'm going to do this, related to work. Schedule a date for the next freaking day, or surprise them. Say, hey, I'm taking you to lunch, or I made a spa reservations. Do something right away to show them that you're taking it seriously and that you are putting action behind your apology. I think that should be a post I do, something about action behind apology.
Yeah, well, let's take it one step further because the action is twofold. It's the short term, but you got to also put in the long term then, because this is going to be a complaint. If you do put an action in place and it's like 3 or 4 days, actually one call we had this week too, it was that very predictably, it would be about 2 weeks that they could put something in place, and then it didn't happen. And that literally had been going on for 5 years.
True.
So I would say twofold. The immediate action plan, and you still need to look for yourself. What are my tendencies? If I tend to not keep this alive for more than a few days or a few weeks, what are you going to put in place? What's the long-term action plan to create real change?
Boom. I love that so much. That's so good. Okay. So there's a lot here. We've talked about improving your apology with empathy and then action, both the short-term action and the long-term action. And then what it means to truly repair, which is that there is emotional acknowledgement on both sides. There's no lingering questions, leaving any one of you with doubt or wondering, is this true? Do they mean this? And then having a plan for the future. What needs to be put in place to repair. And so there's a lot here. We know this is a big topic. It's not easy. It's not just something you're going to be better at overnight. And that's why we really encourage you to sign up and show up to the online web class. It is October 5th. It's the last one before Baby Freeman comes. So go to onlinecouplesworkshops.com. The link will also be in the show notes, and put it in your calendar because we don't send out the recording. Sometimes people are like, oh, I'm not going to show up, and they're going to send the recording. No, if you're actually committed to this content and committed to the breakthrough in your relationship, you're going to show up. So put it in your calendar. Make sure you do whatever you need to do, have help with the kids, stop work early, make dinner early, whatever it is you've got to do to show up because your relationship deserves it. And so I can't wait to see you all. It's going to be amazing. Hundreds of you are signed up, and literally we love connecting with you guys on this and love connecting with you on the podcast. And with that, we'll talk to you on the next episode.